Hello and welcome. This is part 3 of a video series on basic Python programming, where I show you step by step the many different tools and techniques to this programming language. And I do this by building programs with you. Now, let me just remind you that this is what we are building towards. It is a fully functioning calculator, one that you can just go ahead and type in any equation you want, and it'll answer it for you. And it is also intuitive in that it can accept negative numbers and even double negatives. So just keep that in mind, that we are building towards this calculator that is heavy on the back end and it is really easy to use. So the last thing we did in the previous video was the while loop. You'll recall the while loop repeats everything within its indentation. So everything starting from here all the way till here, it's going to be looped over and over again. And it only stops when a certain condition is met. In our case, that condition is when the variable again is not equal to y. So as long as this is true, as long as I keep typing in y over here, then this loop is going to go on forever. Now, first thing that I'd like to improve on here is the format. Now, let me just run this program one time, and I'll just do a simple 5 plus, whoops. Get that I can't do that just yet. So I'll go ahead and run it again. Num1, 5. The operator is a plus, and the second number is a 5, and the result's a 10. However, I do notice that we have a single decimal place here. Now, I like to change that. I like to give it a more accurate decimal placing. Usually 2 would suffice, but you can do 3, 4, 5 decimal placings if you like. But for the purpose of this video, I'll just stick with 2 decimal placing accuracy. And here is how we do it. It is another keyword or reserved word. Here in the print statement, we just type in format, open the parentheses where result is inside, and you can actually see this hint here. It asks for a value and then a format specification, and the format specification will look something like this. Open a quotation, can be double or single, and I'm simply going to do 0.2 F. And that is the way that we are going to specify that I want my result to be in 2 decimal places. So I'll go ahead and save that with Control S, run it with F5. Let's try it again with 5 plus 5. And here we go. We have 2 decimal places. And again, feel free to change this number to any number you like and see the behavior for yourself. And that way you can get more familiar with how format works. Great. Now, you may have noticed in the beginning that I did this, and this is actually the goal of our video today. It seems kind of slow and inefficient for us to type in one number first, followed by the operator and then the second number. So that we've used calculators before. That's just not how we do it. We basically just type in 5 and then the plus and the 5 all in one shot. In the case that we have now, we have to type 5, hit enter, plus, hit enter, and then another 5, hit enter, and then the answer comes out. So here's how we're going to do it. The plan is we want to capture this, I call it a calculation. We want to capture this calculation in one variable, and then we're going to extract each character in this variable and then do what we want with them. And let me pull up my trusty Paint. So here's the plan. I'm going to capture an input. I'm going to call it calc. Oh no, I don't want red. I'll go ahead with blue. Let's say I have a variable, I'm going to call it calc, and I'm going to simply ask the user, go ahead and input something. So go ahead and input, I'll just say enter calculation. Sure. So let's say in this case, the user or I go ahead and type in the entire equation, 5 plus 5. Now remember, since I did not specify the data type in this input, it is going to default to a string. So it's really going to look like this. Now here's the cool part about strings. It is what we call iterative. Iterative meaning we can iterate through this string. So this is a string, and we are going to capture this value first, followed by this value, and of course the last one. Now keep in mind, we're only going to be dealing with single digit numbers now, just to get a basic grasp of iteration and indices. Speaking of which, now let's talk about indices or index. In this string that we call calc, I'll go ahead and put here calc. This is what calc is for now. We can iterate through, and we can also identify where in this string it resides. Here in the computer science world and the programming world, we always start with 0. So here, this is called index of 0. I'll go ahead and put it there. And then the next one would be index of 1, and the last one, index of 2. So just keep that in mind. When we do indices and index, we always start with the index of 0. And the computer, or rather the Python program, will also know that when you say, I want the index of 0, they'll know that you want this. And how we can capture this, let's start with this index, is by this syntax. It will be, you take your variable name, which in our case is calc, and we use square bracket, and we put the index number we want. For our case, it's 0. I like to put a strike through just so we don't confuse it with the letter O. And there you have it. Calc 0 is equal to 5. And same goes for the next one. Calc of index 1 would be the plus sign. Calc of index 2 would be a 5. Knowing this, now we have a plan of action of how we want to capture the equation one shot without needing to hit enter every time. So we're just going to type this in one time, hit enter once, and then we will expect an answer. So let's go back to our code. Here, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out for now. And let's start with what we had before, which was calc, the name of our variable. And I know it's going to be a string, so I don't need to specify the data type. And I'm going to ask the user, I'll put a new line there so that there's some spaces before each iteration. And I'll ask them to enter single digit calculation. And the reason for that is so we're only going to be dealing or calculating single digit calculations for now. And then, since I've already commented this out, this is going to be replaced by what we had in mind, which was we have num1 is equal to calc at index 0. But here's the thing, though. Calc is a string, and as we saw in our diagram earlier, we know that calc of index 0 is a 5. Indeed, it is a 5, but as it stands right now, this actually looks like this. If I were to print it out, it'll give me, or rather it'll show a 5 as a string form. And string data types we cannot use to do mathematical calculations. So we're going to have to convert this index, or rather this entire property, into an integer or a float. And since we were dealing with floats, we want to stick with this data type. We're going to use what's called a cast. So here is how you do it. We want to cast this string as a float. And I'll go ahead and type in float and put it inside the parentheses. Now, this will simply be this, the number 5. And we can do mathematical calculations with this num1. I'm going to get rid of that. And then onto the operator, I'll go ahead and comment this one out too. I'll go ahead and do the same thing. This time, operator is going to equal calc at index 1. And we want to keep this as is, because even if we converted this to a float, it's not going to work because the operator is a plus, minus, divide, or multiply, and that needs to remain a string. So I will leave this as is. And finally, with num2, I'll comment that one out. And num2, we'll do the same thing as num1. We'll do a float, a cast, and we will insert index of 2 into that cast. Now we have exactly what we had before. So these 3 variables are now captured by these 3 operations, or rather 3 initializations. And we can go ahead and test and see what happens. We should expect that when we do type in, say, over here, let's see, for example, if I were to type in 5 plus 5, this is going to be a string. Index of 0 goes here. So num1 is 5. Index of 1 goes into here, which is a plus. Index of 2 goes into here. And then the rest would be exactly the same. It'll automatically do what it needs to do since we have already established all the variables that we needed. Okay, so let me get rid of that. Let's go ahead and save it. I'll start a new shell here. I'll run the module. And okay, so let's try that out with 5 plus 5. Great. And there you have it. Single digit calculation where we only input one time whatever it is we want to calculate. So let's try it again to make sure that all the other operators are working as it should. So I did the plus. Now let's do a minus. 5 minus 5, 0. Yes. And I'm going to do 5 times 5. Perfect. Do a y. And I'll do 5 divided by 5. Excellent. And I'll go ahead and quit there and exit out. So now that we know that we can play with the indices or the index of a string, we can touch on very briefly on what's called a for loop. And how a for loop works is basically what we're doing here, but instead of doing it manually, we're going to do it, well, automatically. So it's going to be automated. And I'll go ahead and open a new Python file here. And for right now, let's say I got the same thing. I've got calc, and I'm going to enter a calculation. Sure. And we know that index 0, 1, and 2 are going to be whatever it is that you've entered. And instead of doing it manually, I'm going to use a for loop. And it starts with a for, and you'll notice that it'll change color because it is a reserved word. And what this for loop does is that it will enter into this variable and look into each index once and do whatever you want it to do. For now, I just want to print. I just want to print stuff out. So we could use the letter I. I, in most cases, would stand for index or iteration. I in calc. And we do that. What this is showing is that inside of calc, and let me pull out the paint again. Inside of calc is 5 plus 5. And what the for loop is doing, again, it is going to iterate starting from the index 0, point here, and then it'll automatically go here, index 1, and then it'll automatically go here, index 2. Once it reaches the end, it quits. And then that's the end of the for loop. So in this case, I would be index 0, and then index 1, and then index 2. So I'm just going to first show you the behavior if I were to just print I. Go ahead and save it. I'll just call this one a test. And I'll hit F5 to run it. And over here, it asks for enter calculation. I'll do the same thing too, which is 5 plus 5. And you'll notice that it printed I to be 5 plus 5 going downwards. And this is normal because you can't see it, but with each print, it prints a new line right here so that it's separated by a new line. And you can go ahead and try it out with different equations, So if I were to do a longer one where it's 5 plus 8 plus 7 minus 9 times 5, and whatever it is you want, and you can watch what happens when you do a print I. It will list out every single input that you had typed. Okay. And like I said, this was just a brief introduction to for loops, and we will go deeper into it in the next video. So keep in mind that we are covering all the techniques that we need in order to create a fully functioning calculator that is intuitive and easy to use. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you watching the video, and good luck.